The Process Podcast, breaking down the daily habits, processes, and tools of high achievers. Now, here's your host, Brad Wilson.
Hey there, boys and girls. Welcome to The Process Podcast. This is your host, Brad Wilson. If you're like me, and if you're listening to the show, I have a suspicion you might be, and you have a burning desire to learn all about how amazing human beings spend their days on this earth so that you can implement their habits, rituals, and routines into your own daily life, take a couple of seconds and click that subscribe button to ensure you never miss an episode. On today's show, I have with me author, TED Talker, and psychotherapist William Pullen. William employs a unique style of therapy that he calls running therapy, where his sessions are conducted outdoors in the sunlight, and his patients are given the opportunity to move around and get the blood flowing instead of laying or sitting on a couch for an hour. William and I dive deeply into his practice, as well as the events that drew him to therapy and wanting to make an impact on people's lives in the first place. In my conversation with William, you'll learn how to actionably incorporate empathy running in your own life, just how terrifying it feels to know you're going to give a TED Talk, why moving forward and making decisions is way more valuable than standing still and trying to predict the future, and much more. So, without any further ado, here's my conversation with William Pullen. William, good morning, my friend. How are we doing?
Brad, how are you? I'm very well, thank you.
Doing very, very well. It's a little cold and chilly, but indoors, feeling good. Excited to talk to you.
Yeah, you too. Here in London, it hasn't started snowing yet, but it will at some point.
How long till the snow?
Oh, well, we never know over here. The climate has changed so much. It's like a sort of tropical climate now. If it snows at all in the south of the country, it's 5 days a year.
Oh wow, it's about the same where I'm at too in Atlanta. Let's start this out by talking about working in the TV industry. How old were you when you got into that, and what led you down that path?
So I was in my late 30s, and I'd always been interested in entertainment. A very good friend of mine was a TV presenter, and I used to spend a lot of time with him. We'd sit around trying to come up with great ideas for TV shows. Then I got myself an agent who represented me, and I pitched some of these ideas, and from there I carried on just developing formats for TV shows.
So you were intimately involved. How old are you, by the way?
I'm 51 now.
51 now, so that was about 12 years ago. I was going to say, you said late 30s, and you look like you're in your late 30s, so I was very confused.
It's just the lighting. It's very carefully arranged. So do you ever have you ever heard of a show, I think it's on Bravo, called The Intervention?
I have.
Okay. Which is about the sort of psychotherapeutic process known as an intervention, when you surprise your partner with 12 of their nearest and dearest and explain to them why their behavior can't carry on, and maybe with a professional intervention as well. We did that on TV. I did it with one of the networks here, and then it got copied and taken to America. So I'm not getting paid for that, but that's okay.
Yeah, that's how things work, right? There's a quote that I'm going to say later on about you can recognize the pioneers by the arrows in their back.
Oh, I like that.
So you admittedly had a meltdown.
I had a meltdown. So just not long after that, I was in a relationship with somebody in another country who's a bit younger than me, another religion, another many things. And her family didn't particularly approve, and I don't think mine did particularly. Some did, some didn't. And it just caused a lot of problems. And I don't know if you've ever been in a relationship where you try to make this thing work, and you step further and further down a gangplank, and then at the end of it, when you finally can't keep the thing going anymore, even though you love the person, there's so little left of you because you've made so many sort of allowances that it hits you hardest when you're at your weakest. Anyway, you live and you live and you learn, you love and you learn, you live and you love. I don't regret it. I wouldn't change that relationship. It was part of my story. It wasn't. That's only part of it. It's how these relationships feed into the bigger story of your life, isn't it?
It is. And losing that person caused you to get pretty depressed. Was it intermixed with a lack of fulfillment working in TV as well? Do you think that they were related?
Yes, I do. I think TV is very superficial. It's fun, but it's superficial, and it doesn't keep you grounded. Just the opposite, really. And it's not particularly rewarding. But it can be fun for the ego when you see your ideas up there on the TV and you're sort of feeding into the zeitgeist. But I think that played a part. I think my bigger backstory played a bigger part. And when they all came together in this perfect storm, as you said, I ended up very depressed. And
how long were you depressed?
Oh my God, 6 months, a year before I got any treatment. My doctor finally said to me, you ought to take some antidepressants. I was reluctant to. He said, the antidepressants will help you get better sooner because it'll stop all the noise in your head and you can start thinking straight. And that, it sounded like a pretty compelling idea because the noise, the voices, the negativity in my head, the repetitive negativity wasn't leaving enough space for anything useful to take place. And so just is in exactly the way he described, the antidepressants did stop that and did allow space for me to start thinking about what I could do to get myself out of that hole.
And as somebody who knows a little bit about mental health, and I know that antidepressants are about 20% of the equation, and then 80% is behavioral change. So once you sort of got rid of those loops that were just playing over and over in your head, can you tell me about behavioral change? What was the big thing that led you to escape that feeling of depression?
I think your behavioral change is absolutely spot on. It's what I think is the problem. Over here in the UK, there's a very admirable job being done by all the royals, Prince Harry and his partner and Prince William and his wife. And they're all doing a lot of mental health work, and they're trying to get together on this idea that we must stop isolating so much and feel that we can talk about our mental illness. So there are various titles for this: break the stigma, things like that. Trying to get rid of two of the very bad parts, where we tend to feel shame, which shuts us up, and then we tend to isolate, which is even worse. And both of these things are very bad, and he's right about that. But my problem is that I fear that inadvertently we may be entering into a culture of almost oversharing, but without the necessary messages around behavioral change and resilience. And that, I listen to a lot of podcasts, and there are arguments to be made. I won't make them myself. They're just opinions at the end of the day. But the argument to be made is that that there's a generation of younger people now who don't have that sort of resilience that they need. They haven't been challenged enough. They've been helicopter parented and so forth. And as a consequence, they just don't have that resilience. But that's a whole nother conversation. Let me just answer your question.
I do have some quick little story about that, by the way.
Yeah.
One of my favorite podcasts is Hardcore History by Dan Carlin, and he did about 4 or 5 shows on the Mongols. And Genghis Khan specifically, they grew up in the steppes, which is this desert. It's not a super fun place to live. And as they conquered and as they moved around, their lifestyle got a little more cushy. And to build their resilience up I think it was every year, every 2 years, he would send them back to the steps to live like they used to live so that it didn't sort of go to their head and to build up that resilience. So basically, I think what I'm implying is that we should send all of our children to the desert and let them fend for themselves, but no.
I think it was it the Spartans who used to, the baby's first night would be spent alone on the roof of the house. If it was still alive in the morning, then so be it. And if it wasn't, so be it.
That's pretty hardcore.
That's pretty hard. I mean, it was a Mediterranean climate. Yeah, it's not that bad. We in this country we send our kids off to boarding school at an age that's not much on from birth, and you know they teach us a certain amount of resilience there. I can tell you. But let me answer your question, which was what did I do? So I did two things. I used my brain. That's not one of them. I did two things. I worked out that if I could do a bodily thing that involved getting out and using my body, and again, that would take care of my body, and then I needed to do something about my mind, so I went into therapy. So I tried to start running, and I rang up a poker buddy, actually, and I was by no means a runner, just the opposite, really, if you can imagine what that might involve. And the two of us met in the park, and I said to him, listen, why don't we see if we can run? You know, I don't think you can any more than I can, but it's a nice excuse to meet in the park. It feels positive. I'd appreciate it anyway, and we'll see what happens here.
If I know my poker player archetypes, he was not much of a runner as well.
There you go. There you go. It doesn't tend to be a sort of meeting place for elite athletes.
Yeah, definitely not.
Definitely not. And anyway, we started off slowly. We talked about our lives. He was going through a divorce at the time. He was actually American. And in time, we built up our distance, and we also built up our trust in each other very quickly, actually. And I noticed how the being outside had created a sense of wellness about me that I hadn't enjoyed inside with the depression. So that was fantastic. I also noticed how talking to him was allowing me to get stuff out. Listening to him was allowing him to get stuff out. And I also noticed how the sense of progress, getting from A to B, I started to feel empowered by that. I was like the guy that could do something. I had been the guy that could do nothing. Now look at me. Every day I was doing not just something, but I was doing a little bit more. Suddenly I'm the guy who's accelerating from a place where I was, dead stuck. So that was fantastic. The psychotherapy was fantastic as well. I think less fantastic. I think the two of them came together very well for me.
And how long were you in school for?
What, to train to be a therapist?
Yeah.
So about a year after I started doing that, I decided to train to be a therapist. That took 3 years of school stuff, and then you do another 3 years of what we call placements. So I did a master's in psychotherapy and counseling.
So 6 years.
6 years in all, yeah. It's a long journey.
Was it your intention throughout that time to integrate running with traditional therapy?
It really was. Actually, the original reason I wanted to train to be a therapist was because I was so interested in therapy, and I wanted to see if I could add something to the world of therapy, just as I had wanted to add something to the world of television. I like to be up close to the world as it is. I'm very interested in how the world works. But along that way, I had to train to be a therapist in order to be accredited, and I had to actually practice as one for 3 years. And I was surprised to find that actually I did have some skills, and that more importantly, I did enjoy it. And so I'm both a therapist and an author now.
Surprised that you had skills. The imposter syndrome at work, which lives in all of us. It was really
tough. Yeah, it was tough. It's been, I think the first couple of years are tough for everybody. You've got the imposter thing, but you've also got not just who am I to do this, i.e. I ought to be somebody special, but actually the sort of I'm less than special. You've got to get over that idea that you're not good enough and that actually you've got something to offer. I think part of my strength as a therapist, and I know that I've got plenty of weaknesses, I'm sure, as well. But I think one of my strengths is that I see psychotherapy as a process, a bit like taking your car into a garage. I don't think of myself as some, spiritual healer or anything. I'm just a guy that's learned some skills. I know how to fix a car. It's important when you walk into my garage that I greet you nicely, and we need to have a nice relationship there. We need to trust each other. And then, we're going to do a good job together of fixing the car, and hopefully you'll drive away comfortably into the sunset. You'll never have to come back to the garage again. That's my goal.
That's a worthy goal. Unfortunately, sometimes people don't always check their oil, and things just happen over the course of our lives that require maintenance. It's part of the human experience. I get this sense when learning about you and talking to you that you hold innovation close to your heart, sort of the bringing together of two different things to make something new, like with the dynamic running therapy and in your TV career. That's something that hadn't really been done before. And like I said before, you can recognize a pioneer by the arrows in their back. Did you have any fear that what you wanted to do would not work?
I had absolutely none, actually. It's not for everybody, but if you think about it, it's so common sense, right? The therapy that I use is a kind of humanistic, person-centered therapy. It's the same therapy I use when I see clients indoors. So there's nothing desperately innovative there. The difference is that when I'm doing running therapy with clients, there's an element of mindfulness there that doesn't exist when I'm here, and then indoors. And then there's another piece where, there's a whole process of using the body as a biofeedback thing. There are so many elements of it.
Let's walk it through like a tangible, a concrete example of dynamic running therapy. What does it look like? Okay, so we would begin as client therapist. It would be open-ended, just as it would be if you were meeting me in my office. I'm Brad. I go to you.
Hi, Brad. We would meet in the park, or the first session might be indoors. You tell me a little bit about where you were at. I tell you a little bit about how I work and what dynamic therapy is going to be about. You tell me if you think you've got any issues around anonymity or becoming emotional outdoors or fitness, things that you don't need to be fit, but you may think that you do. You may have vision issues, who knows. You agree to begin work with me. We go out. The first session, we do something that's called the grounding process, which can be at the beginning of every session. Every minute of each 50-minute session is completely dictated by the client. So if they want to walk, run, sit, have a grounding process, all of that is dictated by them. So I'm not deciding what kind of movement or activity I'm involved in. That's absolutely critical. So once you've decided what we want to do, and once we've decided to do or not do the grounding process, which is the mindfulness piece where we sit there and we use body scans and things like that, it just brings us into a place of intention at the beginning of the session and brings us into our bodies and brings us into the location of where we are, which often differs, unlike when you're indoors, when you're coming back to a familiar office each time, and one that doesn't change. You should never change too much in an office. Keep the frame the same. And after that, you would decide, are we going to walk, are we going to run? And I just follow whatever you were doing. And in the process, I'd say, how's your week been, Brad? And you'd go, well, I've had better weeks. And you go, really, what's been going on? And as you move and you tell me about this, I notice how you speed up when you get angry about your boss, or I notice how you slow down when you get sad talking about your wife. I'm looking, and then I might reflect that back to you. So I notice how you're really slowing down when you talk about that. Do you want to stop for a moment and let's try and get into that? Or And you might say, no, actually, normally around this point, I just actually want to push on through this. And so we talk about that. It's just an opportunity to use the body. The body also helps us bring up thoughts and feelings. That's another really important one. As you're talking about your frustrations at work, what you'll find, and you might have found this in other exercise, is that the exercise itself makes you actually, if you're angry, it'll make you more angry. If you're sad, it'll make you more sad. And so it kind of puts us in touch with feelings which, particularly as men, it can be hard to emote. We can talk about them. Yes, I'm very angry. Or we can go absolutely crazy and start screaming at people. But it can be hard just to find the right way to talk about it. And I think the right way to express anger and sadness. And I think running makes it a little easier.
So you're basically reading their tells and then asking them questions related to their body language.
Absolutely.
The question on mine, and I think everybody else's mind, is how mad are you at the 5th client in a row that wants to run for 50 minutes?
Well, just like your poker sets, Brad, there are no elite athletes in those groups. Very, very few of them want to run for more than 10 of the 50 minutes.
Okay.
Maybe 20, and they run very slowly, so it's never about exhaustion.
Well, one day you might get a horde of elite athletes that want to take you up on it, and then you're just exhausted after every day. Run a marathon. So let's imagine for a moment that there are people in the audience listening who have been considering therapy or are already in therapy, and they just had the thought that, oh my God, this is what I need. But they don't have any viable options around them. Could you give them an actionable process for incorporating dynamic running therapy into their own life?
Well, not if they're already in therapy, then they ought to be in only one therapy at a time. So I wouldn't advise them for anything. But anybody else who's not in therapy, I would suggest they get my book, or they listen to my app, or if they want to do something that's therapeutic but not therapy.
What's the name of your book and the name of your app?
My app is called Dynamic Running Therapy, iOS, and the book is called Running with Mindfulness in the States. It's in 11 countries. And if you listen to my TED Talk, I describe something in there called empathy runs, which anybody can do. It's a really good conflict resolution, and just getting closer to people is probably quite a good way to seduce people as well. I've never said that or thought that before, but it occurs to me.
I'm not going to go down that road. We're just going to leave that one alone. Speaking of the TED Talk that you gave, I was curious about how nervous you were in the preparation of giving that speech.
Well, I was really, something very large had happened in my private life, which I won't go into right now, but something very large had happened in my private life right before that, actually, and that didn't help. But on top of that, it was a massive, massive thing for me. Like a lot of people, I'm terrified of public speaking, and that was the biggest public speaking thing I'd ever done before. In fact, I've done pretty much none before. And there's no hiding out. It's not like giving a talk at your friend's wedding or 40th birthday or 50th birthday. This is your career. If I'd screwed that up, or to the extent that I did screw it, it's forever on YouTube. It's my calling card. And so to the degree that I am an imposter or whatever else it may be, it's up there right now for anybody who wants to watch it, and they can take a read in that. So I knew that I was really putting myself out there. I knew that, one of the reasons I don't like to go into too much detail is because a lot of prospective clients for me, they Google me as they Google anybody else. They Google any therapist they're thinking about working with, and they want to see, who this person is they're about to entrust their life with. So I knew that how I performed in that TEDx talk would dictate not just my academic career and or influence my academic career, my professional career, but it would also influence the therapy itself with my clients, who potentially might see it and draw conclusions from it about who I am and what I am. And being confident is important in therapy. You don't want your clients to begin. If I had appeared extra unconfident during that TEDx, and then a prospective client sees it and they see me, they might, come up with an idea in their head that I'm not somebody that they should entrust there. But then they might be thinking a dozen other things as well at the same time. So who knows what's going on? I mean, I think it's a good calling card at the end of the day. It's not it's not a difficult gamble to make. I think 9 times out of 10, people reward you for having the courage to stand up there, and people love to hear personal stories.
Absolutely.
So I knew I didn't have too much to risk.
Yeah, it still feels like, like you said, going through your feelings, there was a lot potentially at stake, and that's got to be a tough mask to bear, always exerting, always seeming like you're in control. Because, I mean, let's face it, like, everything that we are, everything that we do, the benefit of doing my podcast is that if I make myself look like a jackass, I can just edit it out, and nobody ever knows except for me and my producer and my guest, unfortunately, who got to live through it for that few seconds. But you can't erase a TED Talk. Once it's out there, it's out there. Yeah. But we all play different roles in our life, whether at one point I'm an authority, or I'm a learner, or I'm vulnerable, or I'm devastated, or I'm confident, or I'm brave. We all wear these different masks. So anyway,
have you ever thought about doing a TEDx?
I've never done a public speech ever. So no, I think it would be awesome. Speaking of imposter syndrome, one of the reason that I go after you guys, who I look up to and who I look at mentors and people that do these amazing things, is because I'm just somebody who wants the answers myself, right? Like I ask the questions that I want answers, and then I use these conversations in my own life every single day. So yeah, whenever I have a story that I feel is worthy of people's time and attention and energy, then maybe I'll start sharing it. But until that point, I don't want to bore people. I'm not one of those people that just want to go on Instagram and post a bunch of things and like, look at me, and I have no value in what I'm saying. I want to create things of value. Okay. Essentially, that's a long-winded answer to that simple question. And by the way, I want to say too, there was a point in your speech, speaking of resilience, where you misspoke for like just a second, and I could sort of see you catch yourself and steady yourself, and that was awesome to me. I mean, the whole speech was awesome, but that moment where like everything hinges on what happens next, and you could completely unravel and melt into the floor, or you can continue on and do awesomely. I thought that was an amazing part of the TED Talk for me.
You're the first person to mention that, and it's really nice to hear you mention it in such a positive light. Yeah, I was terrified. I was in such an emotional place with it, as I mentioned, this other stuff going on, but I would have been anyway. And my great fear was that I would freeze, and I can't tell you how many times I practiced that speech. I mean, I'd go play it at night while I was sleeping over and over again. I'd read it backwards. I'd geolocate it in different parts, print it out, read it in different rooms, so then you walk through the rooms during the speech. I mean, I read 4 books on giving a TED Talk and how to speak publicly. I joined Toastmasters International in order to become a better speaker. I had a lot riding on that thing.
And it's a 10-minute speech too, right? Like it's 10 minutes.
But my goodness, it happened once or twice in there, and I suddenly got the fear, and boom, it went. I was blank. And I picked up, in fact, I would say I missed out a tiny bit of the speech in the end, because I picked it up from a place that was, it was the beginning of the next paragraph, I think. So I might have missed out a sentence.
No,
but thank you for that.
It felt seamless. And I did notice that, and I wondered I wondered the fear that was going on inside of you in that moment. Like, oh my God, can I recover from this?
Yeah. I'd like to do another one. Well, I wouldn't actually, but I'd like to do another one. I gave a talk this weekend in the ASICS store on Oxford Street, their sort of superstore, with a couple of other guys who one guy is their ASICS. Do you know ASICS, the shoe people?
Yeah.
Big shoe brand. And there were three of us there. I was doing the mental health piece. These were all a bunch of runners who paid to come and learn about running strategies and running. And my friend Marcus, who's a big marathon guy, he's done all the big ones. He was there as the expert runner. And then there was a sports psychologist there as well, called Stu, and also a good friend. And I really enjoyed it, and it went really, really well. And yet that was public speaking. So maybe I'm improving, I'd love to get up there and do one really good, great TEDx. That would be a great feeling.
Well, one of my guests, Jeff Impman, said that we get good at the things that we do a lot. So, I think it's the same with TEDx's. You kind of went the baptism by fire route and just jumped into the deep end of the pool for your first public speech. Yeah. But yeah, for sure. I think if anybody does them on a regular basis, you will naturally get better. You may start out absolutely horrible, as everybody does with all the things we start out at, but over time you improve.
Yeah. Let's say that you have this is moving on a little bit. Well, it's not completely. Let's say that without knowing what it is or actually inquiring what it is, although you can volunteer it, your curiosity is driven by a particular need to know or resolve something. Let's say that that's the case. It doesn't really matter whether it is or it isn't, but maybe it helps this hypothetical question a little bit. My question is to you, after all these people that you've done these podcasts with, what do you think your big thing that you've learned, the thing that's felt most important to you is?
There are a lot. The biggest one is a tough question to answer, but I can give a few. Marley Lunt, my conversation with him, he talked about how a bad process beats good people every single time, and that's something that's stuck with me. And it's something that whenever I'm not getting the results that I want in whatever area of life, and I see this loop of me performing these actions and continually getting this result, then I start thinking in terms of process problems and how can I disrupt that process and improve that process. Another thing that I learned from talking to all these people is how disarmingly normal they all are. I've never I haven't talked with any of my guests and felt like they had this massive ego or that they had everything figured out. That their process for continual learning is part of what got them to where they are. Yeah, just so many things.
Curiosity is a great quality, isn't it? I think curiosity keeps us from, maybe becoming overconfident, doesn't it? It means that we never think that we really own the answer. I think I was thinking about this a couple of days ago. If somebody asked me to define myself, I think I'd say, I'm just a person of curiosity, and I'll keep on thinking, I'll keep on growing, I'll keep on learning. It's my journey. I don't imagine that I'm a prototype for every man out there. I don't imagine I'm anything like that. It's just my story, and one day I'll die and that story will come to an end. Maybe in the middle of my creativity, I might have only worked out half of a story or my story. Maybe I will have worked out many stories, but it doesn't really matter. There isn't a narrative point in there. There's no moment where I'm likely to get delivery. The redemptive moment will come in the process, not the destination.
Yeah, it's all about the process. It's all about the journey, and really, there is no destination. We're just all a continual work in progress. Curiosity led me to poker. Curiosity, I attribute. People want to talk about skills and attributes that make a successful poker player. Well, my burning curiosity is one of the things that I can concretely say had a fundamental, massive impact on whether or not I was going to be successful playing cards, because I'm the type of person that no matter what happens in any given hand, I'm always asking, what if? Well, what if we did this? What if we had this? You know, with every poker hand, there's a million different simulations you can do in your mind. And I was fortunate enough to have a friend, we were learning together, and to dive deeply into and answer all those hypothetical questions and continually ask those hypothetical questions. I'm sure that if anybody were around us, we would have driven them absolutely insane with our poker theory thoughts and questions, but that was just what we needed to get to where we needed to be. And I've taken that with me, and I've also taken the question asking with me as well, because in poker, if you want to get good results, you really got to ask great questions.
Yeah, and asking great questions and keeping on asking questions and having not the discipline, but just the practice of curiosity is an empowering practice. You know, it makes you into, I think, a stronger person. It's about pushing yourself hard, but doing it in a way that's sort of fun and intellectually interesting. You don't have to say, well, come on, you've got to be the best you can be, and I can see you're not good enough today, and you better think of yourself as more of a winner because now you're starting. No, you don't have to give yourself pep talks. If you put in the hours and the curiosity's there, and you start thinking for 6 hours a day, how can I be better at this? And you start jotting down numbers and working probability, which I know is a massive part of poker. You know, you may well discover some edge, and it's all about the edge, isn't it?
It is. There's this fine line between humility, and you need to be humble enough to know that you don't have all the answers, but assertive enough in the things that you do believe are correct without being egotistical or arrogant about it. And I think that it's a very fine line to walk, maybe in all paths of life.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to the lightning round, aka it's the questions that are pretty much asked in every episode of my show. So, what's a common barrier that keeps people from realizing their potential, and what specific steps do you think people can take to overcome said barrier?
So I can answer this one. I think one of the biggest ones is people tend to project too far forward. So they think, well, I'd like to be an astronaut. And then they think, well, I could start going, I did it, but then in 3 years, I'd hit this point where I'd have to do this and that. Or I'd like to set up this business, and I've got the idea and I've got some money, but I think in 3 years, I think I'll run out of money. And people jump ahead, and so they never start anything. The moral of the story, I think, the way to get around that is just to start stuff. Because you can't know in it, as the thing evolves, you can prepare for the first evolution, you can prepare for the second evolution maybe, but you've no idea where it's going to be in the third or fourth. So to write this thing off because you think you can see into the future is an absurd idea.
I'm with you. And a lot of times when you follow that path, the breadcrumbs lead us to places that we didn't anticipate, and opportunities that are insane and wild, and we never would have gotten there had we not started in the first place.
But by the same token, if we're using a poker analogy, you've got those opening hands, right? And if you deviate too far off those opening hands, there's not much likely to be good for you down the road.
Well, like we said before, you need a good process, right? You can't have a bad process is going to crush a good person. So,
prepare whatever it is you want to do. If you want to set up a business, learn the marketing bit first, or learn about your product, learn about your market before you move. Once you're into moving, evolution 1, evolution 2, but the third one, don't imagine that you know what you're going to need for that market. So that might not even be your market.
And what you just said there hit on another one of the big lessons that I've learned, is that wherever you want to go in life, there are people who have already done the things that you want to do They're out there. They're accessible via the World Wide Web. Send them an email. Ask them questions because they have a process that got them to where they are, right? And most people, when they have had this success, they feel grateful to pay it forward and give back to people who are in the space where they used to be. So finding those mentors, that at least gives you some sort of a path to follow and go down.
Because those mentors have had to grab a nice expression, they've had to pull their socks up and find their courage, and it hasn't been easy for them. And for the guys that follow behind them, the guys and girls that follow, they want to slap on the back, say, come on, man, you can make it. Just get going. The most important thing, put one foot in front of the other, and you'll make it the way I did. Just don't stop. Don't worry about which tree you're going to hit and how you're going to be when you hit it. Just know that if you keep on moving, you're going to get there.
And they see themselves in you. And whatever journey you're undertaking can be a very isolating process where you feel alone and that nobody understands. And these are people that do understand because they have been there. Yeah. So seeking out mentors, one of the major lessons that has been drilled into my head by my guests. So on mental health, which I would say is your expertise, what's something you find people spending a lot of time on that doesn't give them much in the way of results?
Well, I want to say that most people are prone to a lot of rumination. The definition of rumination is it's a kind of overthinking, but when you ruminate on something, it's to think over something that's a problem typically, or something needs to be addressed with a solution, but not thinking through it in a solution-based way. So to ruminate is to just keep on sort of chewing over something, but without ever deciding you're going to come to a conclusion. And I think a lot of people are very lazy in their rumination, and every time they get that feeling that they don't like their job, they ruminate on it a little bit, and with the same 5 thoughts, well, it could be worse, at least I'm pays my mortgage, blah, 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 blah. And they never go any deeper than that. They stay there and they stay there.
How do people go deeper? How do people ruminate better?
Make it solutions-based. Decide that you're going to find your conviction, find your wisdom, find your decision. It may well be the wrong one. Who the hell knows? But if you've been ruminating long enough, then you know how much time you've lost. Years and years people can lose to too much rumination, being stuck in the same place, same relationship, same job, and they just can't get out of it. Well, better to make the wrong decision than no decision. The wrong decision can be turned into the right decision, and probably is going to be the right decision anyway, given enough time.
Yeah, there was a story that I read, and I'm probably going to butcher it because I only read it once, but I imagine it as, you're lost, you're hiking, you're lost, you come to a cliff face, right? You can go left, you can go right, and you don't know the answer. So one way is wrong and one way might be right. But if you go left and it's wrong, you at least learn things about yourself, right? You learn about your resilience, you level up, you learn that wasn't the right direction to go. So then you turn around and go the other way. But if you just sit down and wait for somebody to save you, or wait, you're a goner. You never get to where you need to be. So when you come to these forks in the road, choose a fork. Maybe it's not right, but that's okay, because even if it's not right, it's still beneficial and positive as far as our life goes.
And we learn more each time. We get stronger each time we do that. So it's make decisions and take risks. People that don't take risks don't get anywhere. People that don't make decisions don't get anywhere. It doesn't matter whether the decision is right or wrong. You won't know that till later, but make sure you're a decision maker.
I love that. That's awesome. What's an assumption that people make about their lives that you think they should spend some more time thinking about?
That somehow it's all going to work out, because it won't. Not if you just leave it like that. If you're doing the wrong things and you're making the wrong decisions, you've decided to wallow in the wrong job, you've decided to accept your relationship, either a relationship that's not good enough for you, is not the relationship you want, or one that you're not actually offering much to yourself and you need to do some work. If you don't do any work on making your life better, it's not going to get any better. I think that you can leave a job you hate and decide to go and become a humble cobbler somewhere, making shoes somewhere, and you can have the most fantastic life because you've chosen something for the right decisions, a barrel maker, whatever it is, and you enjoy the company of other people working in a place making barrels or whatever it is. But if you settle for that lousy office job that you don't like, and you notice it trickle into the relationship, which now also is polluted by your job, or vice versa, you need to address those things, and it's not that hard. Anything's better than the crap that you've got today. That there is no infinite amount of time. Now is the time, as Nietzsche said.
Absolutely. And sometimes we can live by the narrative of the world, or narratives that are placed in us instead of our own inner story. One of my favorite movies is American Beauty, where basically the guy just has a breakdown, quits his corporate job, and starts working at a fast food restaurant. And he's immensely happier in his new surroundings, his new life, than he was before, despite making way more money and pursuing all the things that we tell ourselves ought to be pursued. Just follow your own bliss. What makes you happy? And if you're in a situation where you're unhappy, change some stuff, change it up. Even if it's whatever, even if you think, I would be a fool to change things up. If you're not happy, you would be a fool not to. Correct.
And I totally agree with that. We're obsessed in this culture by the most superficial, extrinsic values, status, success, monetary success, looks, youthfulness, etc. None of these things are really going to make you happy for very long. You could and that's something we've got to learn. It's hard to learn it, but it's like, I'll give you an example here. I'm speaking to you from London, right, which is, I think, just marginally remains the world's leading financial center, although New York and Frankfurt try to steal that from us. Anyway, there are many, many people go to work in the city here, just as there are on Wall Street, right? And they go there and they figure, I'll go and make some money on Wall Street. One day I'll do what I really want to do, but let me get paid first. So they go to Wall Street and they work their butts off, and they get paid, and they get paid, and they work their butts off, and their relationships go to hell because they don't really love what they're doing. Their wives never see them because they're working so hard and they're drinking too much. And the first wife leaves them, takes all their money. Now they're paying alimony for the first. So all the money's gone from the first 20 years. Now they can't afford to quit that job, because if they want a second wife, they've got to pay for her and her kids. And now they're caught on a treadmill, And actually, I think the moral of the story is you can get out at any time. You really can. It might come at a cost. You might be moving to a very, very modest life in West Virginia, on $20,000 a year. But if you're living a very modest life, you can get by on $20,000 a year absolutely fine. It's doable. And if that life makes you happy, choose that life, because what's the point of having a life on $200,000 a year that makes you miserable? There's no logic in that.
What's a tragic thing that you regularly see that you wish you could change?
I think it's poor communication between partners. Romantic partners. I think that's very sad, because there are some really basic skills. It's like learning how to make pasta. There are some really basic communication skills that can change everything. In fact, that going back to my TEDx talk, there's a technique in there, which, as I mentioned, I called empathy runs, which is so simple. It can be compressed into one sentence, and yet it's a fantastic architecture for creating trust and creating closeness. And we lose years and years and years talking at each other and communicating poorly. It doesn't have to be that way at all. There's very simple stuff you can do to improve that. So I think it's very sad for a relationship to go to hell when it doesn't need to. I think it's sad for the kids. It's sad for the people in it. Everybody feels like they're not heard and they're not seen, not respected, not acknowledged. And actually, you just tweak a couple of things and all of that can turn back again.
Yeah, and I've interviewed communication experts on this show, and that's specifically what they say as well, that there are communication changes that can happen that can dramatically change your life that don't take very long to implement at all. It's just, doing it effectively. A book that is one of my favorite books of all time now, recommended to me by Rich Sheridan and Marley Lunt, Leadership and Self-Deception by the Arbinger Institute. It's a business book, but so applicable to our everyday and personal lives as well, that I think, again, it's about the inner narratives that we tell ourselves and kind of turning them into dust, getting rid of them so that we can be happier, more present with our family and the people close to us. Because at the end of the day, that's the most important thing in the world, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, agreed.
What's a piece of advice you hear frequently given to other people that you disagree with?
There's one called, there's a saying we have in this country, I don't know, have you heard of it, called any port in a storm?
I have not.
So what it's saying is that when you're in trouble, obviously you're the boat looking, you're in the middle of a storm. The saying suggests that before the boat goes down, you should just go into any port. Because if you leave it too late, trying to find the best port, you may lose everything and drown beforehand. And I don't know, there's something in it for me that, and it may just be me, but I don't like it. It's
Why not?
Look, if I was literally in a boat in the sea, I would choose any port in a storm, because I really do know that, it could take one wave to swamp the boat and it's all done. And if I get into the port, then I'm all good. It's rather black and white and binary, and I don't think most of the dilemmas we're offered in life are like that. And that's why I think it's a bad piece of advice. It's too knee-jerk. It's like telling your son, go and work in the city. If you don't know what to do, go and work in the city and make lots of money. Yeah, it sounds like a good piece of advice. And it's not bad, particularly if he has absolutely no money. But if he has some sort of creative or adventurous part to him, and what he's really saying to you is, I'm not really sure what I should do, you could actually say to him something like, well, why don't you go and explore that? Why don't you go away? Why don't you try this out? Not just, oh, look, why don't you go and you spend 15 years shuffling paper around and creaming 1% off everybody's pension fund. There are other ways there are more ways of living than that. There are better answers than that, I guess is what I'm saying.
So you disagree with the binary answers as related to life?
Exactly. Unless we're really in a storm, then I don't like binary. I don't like binary anything really. I don't think it. I here in London, I went to go and watch Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson have their debate, and Jordan was taking this position that there's a place for religion in the world. God knows he's not really sure how to define religion and what it really means. Or at least is very hard to nail down. But he says the instinct, the spiritual instinct, the instinct to deify things or to deify the process of life, etc. He said that's natural and unavoidable, and it's what we do, it's what we've always done, it's how our mythology is built, and it's how we cope in the world. To reduce it, to be as reductive as Sam Harris is to exist mostly up here in the mind, where you can reduce anything, but it doesn't really speak of the lived experience. The lived experience is not binary. It's not, is there religion or isn't there? Is religion a ridiculous proposition or isn't it? It's more complex than that. It's like, well, however we understand it and in whatever form it takes, it would appear to have some use and some, whether it's just me worshipping the tree outside my window right now, that's a kind of religion too. It has a value, and it's part, whether I like it or not, I am worshipping something out there. I might be somebody worshipping money, worshipping sex. There are all sorts of people worshipping different things. But to say don't worship anything, I think is too binary.
And to expand on that a little, whenever you have two extremely intelligent people, and there are extremely intelligent religious people, and there are extremely intelligent like Sam Harris, and there's no common ground, there's no agreement, it shows the complexity of the issue. Just when two people take different sides, both highly intelligent individuals, and they can't come to an agreement, it's a very complex issue that we're talking about.
Yes, indeed.
So are you a rabid fan of any blogs or resources? And if so, which ones?
I'm fans of podcasts more. I find I have more time to listen to podcasts. I listen to them when I'm on the move.
Favorite podcast?
The Moth. Do you know it?
Storytelling podcast.
Yeah, love it. I love a bit of storytelling so much. I imagine you love it too. There's a lot of wisdom in there. There's a lot of heart. People are telling you stories, and they tell it they're such great storytellers, and you really do think like you've come away with a moment of something, emotional growth, intellectual growth, something.
Yeah, I love, ever since my interview with Victoria Schwab, she's famous fiction author, told me in her process she reads books of all different genres all the time because she likes getting out of her lane. She likes seeing different perspectives. And when she said that, I had the immediate thought of, oh, yeah, I should probably be doing that too with my podcast. I need to listen to all different types, all different kinds, because there's just people have amazing messages. The way when I deconstruct what they're doing, I think, wow, that was really smart and clever. And in 100 years, I never would have considered doing it that way. But now I'm taking that. I'm going to take that out of their process and put it in mine because it's going to make for a much better show. So getting different, going out of your lane, getting different exposure to things in a similar medium is of always, in my opinion, huge value. Do you have any books that you reread every few years? And if so, which ones?
Well, one in particular I'm rereading right now actually is anything to do with Joseph Campbell and the monomyth, and for me that speaks to Jordan Peterson and the truth of the world that we live in, the mythological truth, the mythological arc that lives within us. As nurturers, the archetypes that are within us. Yeah. It helps me make so much sense, but he does it. He's such a great writer, Joseph Campbell. The language is extraordinary.
You're the second person to suggest Joseph Campbell, so I guess I'm gonna have to download it on my Kindle.
Do it. I think it'll blow you away. I think.
What actions do you regularly take that allow your soul to breathe?
Well. Every now and then I have a blowout, which might take the form of a weekend in a European city. Normally it'll involve something like a good amount of good red wine, some sun, some great museums, fill my heart with. I particularly love archaeology, so put me in a museum with archaeology. I'm very happy there. It really fills me up. And then later on, give me some good wine, give me some good food, and that makes me very happy too. So that's one of my popular ones. So yeah, I think rest is good. And then I have a regular exercise program I do, and that keeps me sane. Okay,
you open the doors. Tell me about it.
Oh, it's just running. That's it.
Just running.
I run 3 times a week for each time for about 40 minutes. It's about 4 or 5 mile run up and down the river here in London, the River Thames. It's a nice slow run, beautiful views. I do it with a friend. The speed's just enough to keep fit. Mm-hmm. And the fresh air is good for me. Yeah, it's good for anybody.
What's a story that you've always believed about yourself or the world that you're starting to suspect isn't true?
Well, how about that I'm either a particularly good or particularly bad person? In my book, actually, I talk about something I call it the ice cream experiment, and it goes like this: that if you take somebody into a store and you say, "Listen, we're going to walk into this ice cream store. There's 100 kinds of ice cream here. How many of them do you think you'll like?" And they say, "Well, they start listing them, and they go, "Can you get up to about 8?" And you say, "Well, not anymore." Maybe they get to 12, 15, 20, whatever the number is. And of course, this is a hypothetical story, but if you got them to try every single one of those ice creams, they're going to discover that actually, bizarrely enough, they like all sorts of things they thought they would never like. Marzipan with peanut butter on it, and God knows what, just was really sort of over the top stuff. And they're like, "Well, I'm surprised. I didn't think I liked mint. I didn't think I liked over the top. I didn't think I liked icing. I didn't think I liked those flake things." And then my question is, well, then who are you? Are you a different person than the person you were when you walked in here? They're like, "No, I'm the same person." So then all these ideas you have about yourself, that you're good, you're bad, you're lazy, you're impatient, you're this, they're all nonsense. They're all absolute nonsense. So, yeah, that's my answer.
And that's a tragic thing that I see in my life, are the people that believe wholeheartedly these ideas about themselves without realizing the real truth of the situation and their own inner greatness and the diversity that lives inside of them. They just people can miss out on a lot of awesome things. Well,
so true, and the diversity is perhaps the most important thing to remember, because given the right circumstances, anyone can find themselves tested and challenged and find themselves doing things they never thought they would do. They run out of money, they rob their neighbor because they have to feed their kids. They save a drowning person, even though they can barely swim. They join the Nazi Party in 1930s Germany. Half of Germany did that. You don't know what you're capable of, and often you only find out later on, and some of it's good, some of it's bad. But most of it's going to be a lot more than you think you are, because if you just think you're the person that belongs in this sort of small town, and that the limit of the possibilities of you in the world are, working as a bank teller, if you're happy being a bank teller, fantastic. But if you're not, and you really think that's all that you've got in you, well, you're mad, because you've got so much more in you. There's nothing you can't do. That's a double negative. You should have caught me on that.
I'm not an English major.
You're a poker major.
Yeah, poker major. It doesn't... But no, you're absolutely right. And a lot of times that diversity and learning these new skills allow us to thrive or survive when adversity hits us, because we know our capabilities. If we face adversity and we're not aware of our capabilities, it can seem like too much and too hard to overcome. But if we know we're capable, we're empowered, and we can battle through it much better than we otherwise would.
Absolutely. Brad, for me, I've gone through 50 now, so I speak now as a post 50-year-old. But when you lose enough in your life and you've had enough adversity and you hit 50 or something, you just decide, I don't want to waste any more time in my life wondering whether I'm the right person for this job and whether I've got what it takes to do this, and should I or shouldn't I. If the instinct's there and you're not doing anything else, try it. Move from that job, move from that bank, try something else. Anything's better than being stuck where you're at. And anything's better than just holding your voice. Try speak up, say what you want to say. Go and learn how to play the drums, go and learn how to sing. You probably got a terrible voice, you're absolutely right, but you'll probably have fun doing it. You might meet somebody fun there, and you might discover actually for you it's not about the singing, but suddenly you realize all your life what you really want to do is be a music producer, and that you're actually fantastic at.
The number one regret of the dying is not living a life that was true to themselves, and nobody's going to save us. We got to take these steps ourselves, because if we don't take any steps, we will die. That will be our regret.
And life is for living. You can't get it right all the time, but you can decide I'm going to live versus not live.
Exactly. What's a project you're currently working on that's near and dear to your heart?
I've submitted a proposal for my next book. It's with the publishers, with Penguin. I'm waiting to find out whether they want to take it. That's for a book called The Final 5%, Making Peace with the Tough Stuff. It's the idea is that I've noticed in my life and in my work as a therapist that people tend to work on all the easiest emotional luggage first, which makes sense, right? You're an animal that's mostly focused on reproduction and survival. So fine tuning yourself is the least important in animal terms. The bad news is that your happiness is often dependent on that fine tuning. So what the book does is it gives you a method for getting past all that. Your reluctance to deal with that final 5%, the stuff like shame, guilt, the stuff you tend to sort of try to either ignore or fix. This is another way of dealing with it that I've seen work over and over again. And having done that, the second half of the book tries to help you to become a more authentic person. It gives you a way of being, now that you've taken this 5% that was sort of kept in the margins and you've brought it home, unashamedly bought this piece that you didn't feel great about, but guess what? Now you're okay with, because your expectations about having to be perfect are no longer there. You've dropped your expectations. There's a whole piece in it, but you are now more of a human, more of a three-dimensional human, an authentic human. And so you don't need to apologize for anything. You don't need to hide out. You don't need to pretend to be anybody. You can just be you. And that, I think, provides an enormous power-up, an enormous courage lift, a power lift, a stamina lift. So the book's really about making peace with the tough stuff and about just grabbing life. Well,
I'm not Penguin, and I have no familiarity with the book publishing industry, but I love the idea. And whether or not Penguin takes you up on it, self-publish it, get it out there, I'm sure it'll change some people's lives.
It's a good idea. Brad, I'll send you a copy anyway.
And I will read it. I promise you that. If you could share one truth with the world, what would that truth be?
The truth is that if you take the first step and keep on moving, you can do anything. Just to get moving, just to try things. That's my one.
Very circular. It brings our conversation to a close. Where can my audience find you on the World Wide Web?
Yes, the World Wide Web. So they can find me at dynamicrunningtherapy.com, William Pullen, psychotherapist.com. They can find me on Twitter at Pullen Therapy, on Instagram at @D_running_therapy, and on YouTube they can find my TEDx talk. It's called Movement is Medicine, William Pullen. An app, Dynamic Running Therapy, and a book, Running with Mindfulness. Is that like a flush? Is that a full house? Is that a straight? That's a full house.
Well, I'll be sure to put all those resources up on our show page at mentallyinvincible.com. Thank you very much, my friend. I have thoroughly enjoyed our conversation.
Me too. Thanks, Brad. That was fun. That was interesting too.